let's talk electric vehicles and where they are placed in the automotive world. Now, I have an interesting take on electric vehicles that I don't feel like many people have, in the fact that I just view electric vehicles as a different powertrain on the same level as having a gas powertrain, diesel powertrain, hybrid powertrain, or just fully electric like what we're talking about today. I do my best in my reviews and when I'm talking about things to not politicize the powertrain and look at it as being a car as a car. So today I'm going to be talking about in this podcast about all the things that I do like about EVs, what I don't like about EVs, where I personally think that they fit into the automotive world. If that sounds like something that you're interested in, stay tuned. All right, so first thing we're going to be talking about is what I do like about EVs. Now, these are things that are bringing a big benefit to the automotive world and why I think that they do have a good place in the automotive world. So the number one thing is 0 to 60 time. So it used to be that a 3-second 0 to 60 time was just something that hypercars were trying to achieve, but now we have just standard four-door sedans like the Tesla Model S Plaid, as well as vehicles like the Porsche Taycan, especially with the new Turbo GT, are able to push the boundaries and exceed 3 seconds, no problem whatsoever. So they have really just pushed the boundaries of what cars can do when it comes to speed. The next thing is the allowance of different form factors. So vehicles up until recently have been stuck to having either the engine in the front or in the back, and the rest of the car kind of forms around what the powertrain has. So when you have the engine up front, you have this long hood, and then you have the cabin, and if it's a pickup truck, you have a bed or a cargo area in the back. And then the interior of the vehicle is actually constrained also by where the powertrain goes through it, which is why you have things like a transmission hump that can go through the front and back seats of the vehicle. It makes it so like the center of the rear passengers is extremely uncomfortable, and electric vehicles allow for that to be a little bit more comfortable, while electric vehicles nowadays also are following kind of a more traditional car look and styling just to be able to kind of fit into the market. They do have the capability of completely switching things up. A good example is like the Volkswagen ID Buzz. It's a bus that kind of follows the older design style, but allows for a lot more passenger space in the van because it doesn't have to worry about having an engine up front, and instead it uses a skateboard platform where the batteries are down below, allowing for a ton of passenger space up above that battery. So I think that is really important to think about because it might actually define the future of what vehicles look like when they're not constrained by any specific design because of where the engine is placed. Another thing that is great about electric vehicles, it does have less moving components. I actually have a background in selling engines, transmissions, axles, all that kind of stuff in internal combustion vehicles, and I can say there is so much that's going on in a vehicle that can go wrong when it's running on a gas engine. The engine itself has thousands of different components. You have the transmission, you have transfer cases, you have all of those different things, and any one little thing goes wrong and everything fails. And however, when it comes to electric vehicles, you have the battery pack. Sure, there are a bunch of different batteries within that pack, but I think over time those are going to be really easy to repair. And then of course you have a couple of electric motors depending on what vehicle it is. It can range from 1 to 4 motors depending on what you're looking at. However, outside of that, there isn't a ridiculous amount of moving components when it comes to the drivetrain itself. So simplifying those things can make it so repairing a vehicle is easier, cheaper, and a much better experience overall. Theoretically have less downtime of the vehicle when it's needing to be repaired. Now I know what you're thinking. Sure, a Tesla battery can cost $20-something thousand. We are finding a lot of different cases where that is expensive. However, I do see honestly in the next couple of years as EVs are being built out, that those prices are going to come down. And I'll be completely honest, if you compare something like a Tesla, which is pseudo in the luxury market, and you're comparing it against things like Jaguar, Land Rover, or any of those other like BMWs and in those luxury market, I don't know if you know how much those engines do cost to replace, but it's pretty much on par with the battery pack. While other vehicles, you know, like GM, Ford, and that kind of stuff are much cheaper, I don't think everybody realizes how incredibly expensive a luxury vehicle engine really is in going into transmissions, and then the actual labor of doing all of the work, doing rebuilds on engines. It really, really does rack up and is, I would say, on par with replacing a battery pack. Now, the last thing that I do really like about EVs is that you can charge them at home. Sure, you do have to install some special charging equipment to be able to really get good charge times. However, the nice thing is you can just plug it in when you get home, just like you do with your cell phone, and then you can just sit and forget it. You don't have to drop by gas stations, you don't have to think about any of that, and it's just a really simple thing to do. Of course, as long as you've installed the appropriate equipment in your home, but that is a really big plus to not have to think about. So those are the things that I do like. Now let's get into the things that I don't like about EVs. Number one comes down to lower range. Now, while electric vehicles have been improving a ton over the years, they still don't quite have the range of a gas vehicle, and the reason really comes down to filling back up. Of course, filling up a gas car takes just a couple minutes, whereas charging up an electric vehicle takes upwards of 45 minutes to an hour, depending on which vehicle you're looking at. I know that there are other vehicles that do charge faster and that kind of stuff, but your general consensus is it's around 45 minutes to get a reasonable amount of range back, which means you do have to think about that, and a gas car just can go farther in a faster period of time, which is really, really nice, and is a big downside to electric vehicles that I think most people are thinking about, and that's called range anxiety. Next thing that I don't like is longer charge times. Having to sit there for 45 minutes is a big downside. There's no way around it. You can argue it all day long, but that is just a big downside and a big detractor from a lot of people, especially those that don't want to install special equipment at home, because things like the Hummer EV, I think, can take upwards of like a week to charge up to 100% when it's sitting at home with just a standard charging. And that's just a big detractor and something a lot of people just don't want to deal with, and I think is the biggest issue as to why there isn't an adoption rate of EVs yet. Another thing that is a big downside comes down to the batteries themselves. These things are crazy expensive. I already talked about it a little bit earlier, but battery packs are just expensive, and if they do fail, a lot of times they have to completely replace the battery pack, and that can be expensive. We don't really know what the future holds when it comes to repairability of a lot of these EVs, and a lot of people are finding that it is really expensive and something that you should be keeping account of when you buy an EV. Which again leads me to my next point, which is the uncertain future. So if you're going to buy an electric vehicle right now, you don't really know what the manufacturer is going to do for long-term success of that vehicle. Sure, they may be taking care of it now, but however, if EVs drop off in popularity like we're kind of seeing right now, you don't know if you're going to get a ton of maintenance. A good example of this is the original Tesla Roadster that I actually have reviewed in the past. Tesla kind of forgot about for a long time. They weren't willing to do any repairs on them because they had kind of moved onto the skateboard platform instead of the old battery architecture that they had used in the Roadster. So they just decided to stop maintaining them, and it had to go to the private sectors to do any form of maintenance on the vehicles, which is a big downside. And I would be a little bit worried if I were to buy an EV now, if that would be a concern. So those are the things that I do and I don't like about EVs, but where do EVs fit in the market for me? Now, I had touched on it a little bit earlier, but I honestly think EVs just are another powertrain. It's another choice for customers. I think that's a really good thing. I think people do over politicize EVs a little bit too much and not just seeing them as an alternative powertrain for people that do want an EV. For a lot of people that are not automotive enthusiasts, they don't want to think about their cars. It's just an A to B thing, and a lot of times an EV does a fantastic job of that. If you're not somebody that takes long road trips or commutes all the time or any of that kind of stuff for longer periods of time, an EV, you don't even have to think about. Sometimes you only have to charge maybe once a week. You just plug it in at your house and you don't have to think about it again. And that's a really nice thing. And considering there's less maintenance costs, less work going into the vehicle, it is kind of nice for a segment of people out there. It doesn't have to be politicized. It's just another powertrain, and I think that's a really good thing. That means there's going to be enhancements in the EV side, which can help with hybrid components like the Lamborghini Revuelto that we have coming out soon. It has an amazing hybrid powertrain, but the only way we'd be able to have hypercars like that, where it has a hybrid powertrain, is due to the fact that there has been such enhancements in the EV side of things. They were able to put the two together to create an amazing hypercar that a lot of people like and is allowing the V12 to continue to be able to live. That wouldn't be able to happen if EVs weren't as good as they are now today. Now, do I think that EVs will be the only car out there? No, honestly, just like it always has been, there's going to be multiple different powertrains to be able to choose from. Will EVs gain in popularity over the next 10, 20 years? Yeah, my personal thought is that EVs will probably be around 20% of vehicles on the road. They already are getting pretty close to that. I don't know if you've seen how many electric vehicles are out there. However, it is getting bigger and bigger. I don't think it'll ever be the 100% of cars on the road will be electric vehicles, but I think it's going to be a significant amount of vehicles on the road, and that's okay. Now, as for myself, I personally think that hybrid vehicles are probably one of the best solutions nowadays. I think it's a fantastic alternative, something like turbochargers. I'm not a big fan of turbocharged vehicles just because turbochargers do put so much strain on a gas engine. A lot of times manufacturers are choosing to have smaller engines with a turbocharger on them to be able to give you that extra speed when you need passing and that kind of stuff. And I actually think a hybrid powertrain does a better job because it's not putting the extra strain on the engine, it's actually relieving strain on the engine. And so I think hybrid powertrains are actually a really great alternative to a standard gas engine because they actually work together in a really great way and can allow things like a front-wheel drive powertrain to be all-wheel drive without a lot of extra components. And honestly, would probably last longer too. And then the final thought I have on where EVs are fitting in the market is I think they're actually making gas cars better. Gas cars were not doing a ton when it comes to advancements in them. And I think electric vehicles have really been pushing gas cars to get better. And they're competing with EVs that are in the 3-second, 2-second range for 0 to 60. They just have to be better. So it's pushing manufacturers to make their ICE cars better and better. And I think that's a good thing of pushing the automotive culture forward instead of holding it back into the past. So anyways, that is my thoughts on electric vehicles. I wanted to get it out there because I think too many people are politicizing it. People are saying that electric vehicles are not even cars. It's like, it's just a powertrain. And I just hope that people kind of take a little bit bigger and better look at electric vehicles and their place in the market, because I think people are just angry to be angry. And I hope this has kind of opened people's eyes a little bit into what an EV can be and what I personally think about EVs, so this is something that you guys can reference to whenever I'm talking about EVs on this channel. So if you haven't already, make sure to subscribe to this channel or wherever you're listening to this podcast. I would greatly appreciate it, and I hope to see you guys soon.